Leader, you seem to take so much exception to the questions of the official opposition, as if we don't have the right to do our job. You question our integrity, you question our professionalism when we ask you questions. I ask these questions on behalf of the people of Winnipeg, on behalf of the people of my province of Manitoba, and indeed on behalf of all Canadians. I, Leader, am doing my job. Isn't it a bit hypocritical to tell senators to accept the will of the House when your government refuses to do so?
Target acquired.
Honourable Senators, a message has been received from the House of Commons with a bill C-21 entitled An Act to Amend Certain Acts and to Make Certain Consequential Amendments, Firearms, to which they desire the concurrence of the Senate. When shall this bill be read a second time?
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall this bill be read a second time?
Gold.
Senator Gold. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading 2 days hence. It is moved by the Honourable Senator Gold, seconded by the Honourable Senator Laboucan-Benson, that this bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading in 2 days. Is it your pleasure, Honourable Senators, to adopt the motion? Carried. Senator Dagenais. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Welcome, Minister. Madam Speaker, welcome, Minister. In the last 6 months, 9 police officers have been killed. Your recent bill would not have prevented violence. C-21 would not have prevented violence. This, in fact, criminals were using unregistered firearms to kill them, so your bill will not help these cases. Sometimes there are cases of people with mental health problems who should be in institutions but have been released. Do you not find it discouraging to see all the time spent by officials to classify firearms rather than to find solutions, immediate solutions to this crime, medical, judicial, and other? Minister. First of all, I'd like to share my concerns that, yes, this has been a very difficult time for the police service community, and I've tried to attend every funeral whenever a police officer has died in the line of service. In my opinion, the only way we can reduce of firearm violence is through a comprehensive plan based on 3 pillars. 1, a strong border. We've already invested $450 million in the border, along with the prevention strategy. And $250 million will be spent on community services to address community factors. And finally, a strong bill such as C-21 will put in place a national firearms plan for assault rifles, and I believe this will make a difference.
Senator Duncan.
Minister Mendicino, thank you for your attendance here today. In January, you traveled to the Yukon, meeting with Canadian Rangers, Yukon Fish and Game Association, gun owners, the Yukon and First Nation governments. You also went out on the land and stated to the Yukon media, and I quote, "You were able to experience firsthand how firearms are used safely and responsibly." And you concluded your quote to the local media saying you learned a lot, end quote. Minister, in my efforts as Senator to represent my region, would you tell me how this learning experience, what you heard from Yukoners, is reflected in Bill C-21?
Minister.
That was perhaps one of the most educational and enriching experiences that I've had as a Minister of Public Safety, someone who comes from a big city in Toronto, but being able to go to the Yukon and taking a trip in the Overland Dawson Trail with gun owners, people who are not only engaging in a hobby, but for them, this is a pastime. It's part of the fabric of who they are. And I was there to see how it is that they carry out this pastime in a way that is safe and secure, how they use legal firearms to hunt, to trap, and in some cases with First Nations communities to protect themselves from the wildlife that is there. And so I assured them that Bill C-21 is not about targeting law-abiding gun owners, as we often hear spread by the Conservative Party, but rather going after the AR-15 style firearms that have been and could be used again in the future in mass shootings. And as you know, the Mass Casualty Commission from Nova Scotia called on our government to strengthen the national ban against those AR-15 style firearms. We took that action, and we did it with a broad consensus of 3 of the 4 major recognized parties in the House of Commons, but in a way that is respectful of life in the North, and that will continue to be the way in which we do this work.
Senator Dagenais. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, I'd like to come back to C-21. Do you think that the bill will prevent crimes by street gangs, whether in Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, or will C-21 simply harm honest citizens who take the time to register their firearms? Minister. Yes, Senator, I am confident that when Bill C-21 is in effect, it will save lives. It will prevent further tragedy caused by shootings. Handguns are the most common weapon used in murders, and that's been borne out by statistics. With a national freeze on handguns, we'll be able to improve the situation of firearms crime. We also need to improve our resources, strengthen our border. That's exactly what we're doing. And we also need to attack the problem at its roots. How? With a promotion plan, an awareness-raising plan, working with local partners who better understand than us, parliamentarians, what the risks are in the field. And thanks to these initiatives, we will be able to prevent crime in the future.
Senator Plett.
Minister, crime is now at a record level in Winnipeg, as it is across the country. Winnipeg saw a record of 53 homicides in 2022, 30% of them committed with firearms. In Bill C-5, the Trudeau government eliminated 8 mandatory minimum penalties involving the use of a firearm in crime, including robbery with a firearm, extortion with a firearm, discharging a firearm with intent, using a firearm in commission of offences, and 4 others. You seem to think that creating more gun laws is the answer. Minister, how did the Trudeau government's elimination of mandatory penalties involving the use of firearms help combat the rise in violent crime?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, as the Honourable Senator will know, Bill C-5 was a direct response to a number of Supreme Court of Canada decisions which had systematically struck down mandatory minimum penalties, which had stripped the judiciary of their independence and had overreached by violating the Charter. Conversely, our government has looked at putting in place important gun control laws like Bill C-21, which will reduce gun violence because it strengthens the ban against AR-15 style firearms, puts in place a national freeze on handguns. Those are initiatives which the Conservative Party has committed to repealing, and the result of that would be to re-legalize these guns which have no legitimate recreational purpose. I would also just conclude by saying, Madam Speaker, that when it comes to the Winnipeg Police Service, they have acknowledged that the government's investments, including the $390 million, which I just recently announced, will help them do the job on the ground. And that is work that we will continue to do in partnership with all provinces and territories and municipalities, as well as the police that work in those respective jurisdictions.
Senator Boisvenu. Minister, last March 30th, I met with all the families of Portapique who had lost a family member. Apparently, you went through there as well. So why did neither you nor the Prime Minister meet with these families, and why did all of these families so far have to pay all the expenses related to the murder of their loved ones? The government provided them with absolutely no assistance. Why didn't you help? Why didn't you meet these families, and why are you not helping them financially, Minister? With all due respect, Senator, yes, I did directly engage with the Portapique families. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I was the first minister on the federal government side that met directly in person with groups of families in order to express my condolences, because I know it's a period that is extremely painful. That is why I was there when the Commission published its final report, once again, to support those families. That is why earlier today I announced the creation of an implementation committee in order to implement the final report's recommendations. We're going to appoint the retired Justice Linda Lee Hollande, a person with a great deal of judicial experience, who is also a Nova Scotian and a resident of Nova Scotia, and her approach will help us realize the vision of this report, because it is time to reform the RCMP.
Welcome to the Senate, Minister. Minister, as you have just mentioned, today you announced the appointment of Justice Hollande as chair of the committee that will monitor and report on the implementation of the recommendations of the Nova Scotia Mass Casualty Commission. We welcome this move. My question for you is this: will the government support the calls of the final report of the Mass Casualty Commission and the inquest into the Renfrew County killings to declare gender-based violence an epidemic-level crisis in Canada, and most importantly, create a comprehensive strategy at the federal level to address this problem?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Minister.
I want to thank you, Senator, for recognizing the significance of the announcement and the appointment of Justice Hollande as the chair of the committee that will oversee and coordinate the implementation of the recommendations of the final report, in particular for the families. I do agree that we have to deal squarely with the incredible and alarming challenges around gender-based violence, which the committee very thoughtfully touched on. This is work that I am doing in partnership with a number of other colleagues, including, I would point out, Minister Marcy Inn, who is rolling out an over $600 million gender-based violence national strategy to work closely with women's groups on the ground so that we can take a trauma-informed, victim-centered approach to reduce barriers. One of the things that I think you will agree is the most challenging aspect of this work is to encourage that women can come forward and report. And the concerns that I have heard time and time again is that they are worried that the voice on the other end of the line will not believe them or will not treat them with respect. And that is what has led to tragedy and loss. And so I assure you that as we implement the recommendations of the Mass Casualty Commission, that we will work with Justice Oland, we will work with the Nova Scotia government, we will work with victims and survivors from that tragedy and all women who have suffered that trauma in the past.
Senator Plett.
Saturday will mark 4 years since the release of the final report on the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Indigenous families want to know what happened to their loved ones, Minister, just as any other family in Canada would. These families deserve answers, and it's high time that the Trudeau government treated all victims of crime with respect. In both 2021 and 2022, I asked the Trudeau government what progress was being made by the RCMP in resolving these cold cases. I did not receive a satisfactory response, but quite frankly, that's not surprising. Minister, what specific progress has been made in resolving the cold cases since the final report was released in 2019, and have any RCMP reviews resulted in arrests, charges laid, or convictions?
Minister.
First, Senator Plett, I want to begin by saying that I share your concern and the concern of everyone around any cold case, because those women and those young girls deserve justice. And that was the reason why we created the MMIGW Commission, which was a commission that had not been previously struck, but one that we did strike because we want justice for those victims and survivors. As to the most recent status of any outstanding investigation and cold cases, obviously those are questions that are best put to the RCMP or any other police of jurisdiction who have the responsibility for carrying them out, and I'm happy to work with you, Senator, to get the latest update on that. And I know that our time is coming to a close here, Madam Speaker, shortly, but I do hope, Senator Plett, that you will take the technical briefing on Bill C-21, which we have offered. It is important that we do this work together so that we can save lives through responsible gun control legislation.
Senator Plett.
Well, since you asked me about the technical briefing, Minister, let me ask you a question. Yesterday, Senator Gold's Parliamentary Secretary, Mark Gerretsen, tweeted, and I quote, "I am calling on Senator Don Plett to stop stalling and get tough on crime by passing Bill C-21. The bill has not been introduced in this chamber, Minister. It has not been introduced in this chamber. The Senate received Bill C-21 2 sitting days ago. The sponsor has not yet spoken. I find it strange that the Parliamentary Secretary for the Senate for a year and a half, and he still doesn't have a clue how this chamber conducts his business. Why did Mark Gerretsen accuse me personally of stalling a bill that the government sponsor has not moved yet at second reading? Do you think this unfounded personal attack is warranted, Minister?"
Monsieur le Ministre.
Minister.
Madam Speaker, if the Senate, if the government's representative in the Senate has a parliamentary secretary, that is news to me. But I assure you, Senator, that we will work very, very closely with you and with everyone in this chamber to ensure a thoughtful debate about Bill C-21. But I do want to take a moment to underline that there is good policy in that bill, in the form of the strengthened ban of an AR-15 style firearm, in the form of a national freeze on handguns, in the form of raising maximum sentences against hardened gun traffickers, in the form of introducing red flag and yellow flag protocols so that we can reverse the trend in the connection between domestic abuse and gun violence. There is a lot of good in that bill, Senator, and my only request is that we work together to see it come into force so that we can save lives as quickly as possible.
Stand.
Bill, second reading, projet de loi deuxième lecture, numéro 1.
Number 1, C-13. Stand.
2, C-21.
Senator Yussuff.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Senators, I move that this bill be read for the second time.
It is moved by the Honourable Senator Yussuff, seconded by the Honourable Senator Beam, that this bill be read a second time. On debate, Senator Yussuff.
Honourable Senators, I rise today to speak on Bill C-21, an act, of course, to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments to firearms. Colleagues, I want to recognize at the start of this debate that the conversation about guns is never an easy one to have. It's usually filled with high emotions, strong opinions, and can be very divisive and polarizing, because it's about the life and death, safe communities, and people's rights and privilege. For some people, guns are a tool. They're used, of course, to protect their farm animals, to protect themselves from in the wild, to hunt for recreational or for sustenance food, or to pierce a target in a competition, and for some it's just a toy to have fun with. While for others, guns especially, those considered assault style are grotesque instruments of death and are destructive that have caused immense pain and suffering to innocent people and have no place in our society. I know it will not be easy debate, and I am expecting, of course, colleagues in this chamber will have strong opinions on both sides of the issue. Whether a government intends to restrict or limit its citizens' ability to own personal property like firearms, it is something that we as legislature must seriously consider. Colleagues, fundamentally for me, this bill is about striking a fair balance between the rights of Canadians to safe communities and the privilege of Canadians to own certain types or models of guns for hunting and sport shooting. Finding them balance is not an easy task. For some gun control advocates, this bill does not go far enough. For some gun rights advocates, it goes too far. As debate on this bill progresses, I want you to think about the people's right versus privilege. I think this bill at the end of the day strikes a good balance between the rights of Canadians to a safe community by reducing the number of firearms in circulation and the privilege of Canadians to use certain models of firearms for sports and target shooting and collecting and for hunting, etc. Senators, I want to talk today about what this bill is about and clear up some misconceptions, what is not. There is no silver bullet in combating gun violence, and this bill does not purport to be a silver bullet. This bill is just one piece of solving a very complex puzzle to creating safe communities through a group of initiatives that I would like now to explain in more details. First and foremost, Bill C-21, introduced a year ago, would codify in law a national freeze on sale and purchases and transfer of handguns, which took effect via regulation on October 21st, 2022. What that means is that any legal handgun owner who had a handgun before October 21st of last year can keep and use their handgun. This will, however, not able to purchase a new handgun or transfer or sell their handgun, and no one who didn't have a handgun by last October were able to acquire one. For the general public, there are only limited reasons for which a person may be licensed to acquire or possess a handgun, which is a restricted firearm. Those notably are being for target practice or target shooting competition or as part of a collection, which is not permitted reasons for hunting. I want to be clear on the fact that the handgun freeze in no way limits the privileges that allow Canadians to hunt. The handgun ban restricts only the privileges of approximately 275,000 Canadians to collect handguns and use them for sports or recreational shooting. There have been a growing increase in the prevalence of handguns in Canada. Between 2010 and 2020, the number of handguns increased by 74% to 1 million handguns owned by approximately 275 individuals in our country. Researchers that are available for handguns in developed countries and the incidence of firearms crimes and violence and misuse are collaborated. By restricting handgun accessibility and by freezing the sale, purchase, and transfer, the government expects that this will be especially cap the growth of privately owned handguns and have positive effect on gun violence as a result. The bill also includes other significant measures to address the alarming role of guns in gender-based violence through red and yellow flag laws, strengthening border controls by increasing maximum penalties for gun traffickers, create authorized to combat firearms smuggling, trafficking, and related offenses, amend the criminal code definition of prohibited firearms to add a new prospective technical definition which contains the characteristic of an assault-style firearm, which would only apply to firearm designed and manufactured after the bill comes into force date, and address the growing threat of illegally manufactured firearm, otherwise known as ghost guns. The latter two measures are particularly important, and I want to start with them explaining what this bill is about. Bill C-21 adds a brand new technical definition which contains the characteristics of assault-style firearms to the definition of prohibited firearms in the criminal code. The new future definitions focus on semi-automatic, centerfire firearms that are not handguns, that are originally designed with a detachable magazine with a capacity of 6 cartridges or more. It is important to note that this new definition would not only apply prospectively, which is to say that it does only impact firearms which are designed and manufactured after the date when this provision comes into force. I want to be clear, no legal semi-automatic center firearm circulation right now that is not a handgun will be impacted by this new definition. Incorporating technical criteria into this definition puts the onus on the industry to do their part in protecting our communities from these dangerous weapons. As I just mentioned, this will not impact the classification of existing firearms in Canadian market. The proposed prospective technical definition of characteristic of assault-style firearms allow us to proactively address the advances in the firearms market and keeping firearms designed to kill as many as people as quickly and easily as possible out of our communities. This is part of a big picture of keeping Canadians safe. We have seen far too many tragedies, including those recently in Nova Scotia, in Ontario, and in Quebec. The government have been clear that firearms designed for war, like AR-15, that are capable of rapid fire, can inflict catastrophic harm, have no place in our community and in our country. C-21 also calls for parliamentary review of the new technical definition of a prohibited firearm after 5 years, which will keep and inform whether the objective of the proposed changes are being achieved. Bill C-21 also includes several proposed amendments to control the purchase, meaning of transfer or importation of cartridges magazine by requiring valid firearms license. These amendments received wide support from both sides of the aisle and Canadians during the clause-by-clause consideration of the bill in the other place. Senators, these amendments are in dire response to the recommendation C-21 from the final report on the Mass Casualty Commission. This, to me, is common sense measure. Let me give you a real-world example of what it means. In 2018, a gunman in Toronto killed 2 people and wounded 13. Known as the Danforth shooting, the perpetrator did not have a legal license to own a handgun, but nonetheless was legally allowed to purchase cartridges magazine that he used to kill and wound 13 victims. I do not personally have a license to own a gun. However, Senators, I can go to a store right now and buy a magazine for a legal firearm without presenting a license. How does it make sense? This will also take action against ghost guns. These are guns that have been illegally manufactured, often through 3D printing, which can use plastics, metal, or epoxy resins, or through the assembling of various parts, which can result in firearms with no multi-serial numbers. These ghost guns are dangerous not just because of their capacities for violence, but because they are unmarked, untraceable, and are firearms of choice for many criminal activities. It is disturbing and easy to find schematics for 3D print firearm component online for free. Equally disturbing, it is impossible to know exactly how many ghost guns are on the streets in Canada today. What we do know is that the Canadian Border Service Agency is seeing an influx of uncontrolled firearm parts across the border. These are linked to illegal firearms production in Canada, and several of these components are key to producing a 3D printed ghost guns. For example, in August of 2022, the CBSA announced 2 significant seizures of ghost guns in BC, following the interception of Course International Mail Centres. These result in the seizure of 3D printing machines that was in the process of printing a lower receiver for a handgun, 6 handgun lower receivers, and no serial number, and a loaded 9mm handgun with no serial number. And in February of 2022, the CBSA announced the result of an investigation into 3D printing firearms following interception, of course, of undeclared firearms components, including metal parts and inserts commonly used to reinforce the plastic frames of 3D printed handguns from a processing centre in Ontario. This resulted in the seizure of 2 3D printers, handguns, and 3D printer. The implications of 3D printer firearms, colleagues, are staggering, and that's precisely why Bill C-21 targets them. The proposed measures will amend the Firearms Act that business or individuals selling firearm parts will be required to ensure the buyer have a valid firearm license. This is like the existing requirement to ensure individuals possess a valid firearm license when they purchase ammunition. Other proposed measures will classify illegal manufactured firearms as prohibited firearms and enact new offences targeting ghost guns in the possession and distribution of digital files for 3D printing firearms, or prohibited device for the purpose of illegal manufacturing or trafficking. These ghost gun amendments received unanimous support from all members of the committee studying the bill in the other place. Senators, I would like to turn to another group of important measures in C-21 related to reducing the firearms-related family violence and self-harm. Statistics show that victims of intimate partner violence are about 1 in 5 more likely to be killed if a firearm is present in a home. That's why the new red flag laws will allow the courts to order the immediate removal of firearms from individuals who may be a danger to themselves or to anyone else. Additionally, yellow flag laws will allow chief firearms officer to suspend an individual firearm license if the CFO receives information calling into question their license eligibility. These red and yellow flag laws will have been further strengthened by recent amendments to revoke firearms license within 24 hours of domestic or intimate partner violence and report weapons prohibition orders or protection orders to the authorities within 24 hours. The amendment also introduced a clear requirement for medical professionals to disclose information if a patient may be in danger to themselves or others with a firearm. Of course, the identity of vulnerable persons who provide information to the courts will be protected. Let me be clear. There is no obligation for victims to use these laws. There will be other additional protection. I'd like to share a few more important statistics today. We know that more...
Senator Senator Yussuff, I regret that I have to interrupt you. You will have the remainder of your time the next time the item is called. Il est maintenant.
It is now 4 p.m. And pursuant to the order adopted on September 2022, I declare the Senate adjourned until Thursday, June 1st at 2 p.m. The Senate so decreeing.
Perfect.